criminal, cruel, torturous way. And this is not one, this is one of the most talked about experiment. There were a huge list of these experiments. In fact, if we look at the World War II in the 40s, that was a time when there was humongous amount of human experimentation. And I'm not sure if you know, the German physicians, right from the days of von Grafe down the list, you see number of, eponymous diseases, the organs, the names. You read, they were all Germans. You can't beat the contribution of those guys. And they were also doing this. Okay? Japanese and Germans exceeded all limits. Did the Americans do that? Huh? They were a little more scrupulous. These guys were totally unscrupulous. But Americans were a little more scrupulous. Okay? And they would seek an informed consent. They would tell, this is, I'm going to do an experiment on you. Okay? But then they will say, okay, these are captive groups, like soldiers, like jail inmates. Okay? Like you have admitted patients under your care, closer home. You have admitted patient, you become the owner of that patient, the life and limb of that patient. They would not explain that this I am doing, it might kill you. It might maim you, it might disable you forever. They will withhold. They will say, okay, yeah, I am ready to undergo the experiment, but they will not tell this might kill you. So that was the American approach. So, I'm not sure you heard of Nuremberg trial. I read a book on this almost 50 years ago. A very fascinating book, Nuremberg trial. Okay? And about the medical component, there is a book which you can download. I did with great difficulty, okay, in English language, written by American authors around 1950 or 51. They have given the transcripts. Because all this got revealed when these people were put on the trial. Okay, Nuremberg is the name of the city where all the Nazi criminals were, tried. And this, for the medical physicians, there were 23 guys who were, and you can see them all sitting lined up here. This is the defendant's table where they are all sitting. 20 of them were physicians. And some of these people, they were begging, let me complete my experiment. 7 of them were hanged to death. Many of them, were put for life term. There are hardly any who escaped the trial. The recurring theme of this Nuremberg trial, when they were putting these physicians, was the Hippocratic Oath. What is that Hippocratic Oath? First, do no harm. Okay? So, couple of guys, let's not go into details, who appeared for the prosecution. One of them was a physiologist, the other guy was a psychologist, and they came up with Nuremberg Code in 1947. Okay, and this, as you go along, the important thing is that you have to have consent of the person who's participating in your experiment, and it should be legally valid. He should have legal capacity. Like children don't have, the mentally sick patients don't have. So is he legally competent? So it has to be, the word is competent. Is he competent to give consent? An unconscious patient is not competent to give consent. Okay? Or somebody who doesn't have the mental ability. So you have so many of those kind of patients, So has he given it free of choice? Or you said, okay, you want treatment in my center, okay, you'll have to participate or go home. Many of our patients we enroll like that. Huh? Or, we have ways and means of, coercing them, we have putting them under duress of various kinds. And it should not be just random. Any experiment comes to your mind, because you're a researcher and you say, let me find out this. No, it must be meaningful. It must have good of society at large. These must be preceded by animal experiments. I am not going to go into the details of animal experiments. Even if you want to do an experiment these days on a rat or a mouse or a guinea pig, there are a whole set of constraints and, available ethical issues. And it should not lead to physical or mental torture. Okay. And if, as a investigator, you have a prior knowledge that this could result in death or disability, you should not be doing that. And likewise, there must be adequate, you must be trained. You must have adequate infrastructure. You must be qualified scientifically. And subject who's being experimented upon should have the liberty to end that experiment. He says, no, I'm tired, I'm walking out. So he should not be held captive. No, तेरे पे तो experiment हो रहा, हमने इतना पैसा खर्च दिया तेरे ऊपर. He should have the liberty to walk out any time. Okay? And scientists, if he realizes, you read about several trials, we can't go into the details of those trials, where they are prematurely shut down. Because now they have quality control, a separate team which is a quality control team, which will keep looking at the data all the time. They keep looking at the data, and if they find in a particular experimental group, there is more than expected disability or death or serious adverse events, they advise that this should be stopped forthwith. We should not continue. And there are so many examples of that. Now, the most important thing which emerged from this trial. Now, in the trial, the physicians argued, the defendants, they argued, look, it was the government. I didn't do it voluntarily. My government ordered me to do it. See the difference? If your boss says, your chief says, do this experiment as a dissertation or a thesis, whose responsibility is it? So this trial said the person who is conducting, it's his personal responsibility and accountability. Okay, it can't be shifted. You can't say, no, it's my boss. If you are doing the experiment, it is your own accountability. Now, what was the essence of this trial? The essence of this trial was, and the Nuremberg Code was, that consent should be given by a competent individual and it should be voluntary participation. That we have understood. But what was lacking? There was no legally binding authority. They didn't name any authority which will ensure that the guys are following the experiments ethically. Now, how many of you heard of Helsinki Declaration? Every paper, I can tell you, has this standard line. This paper, this follows the tenets of Declaration of Helsinki. And I'm sure 99.9% of the authors writing this line have not even read the Declaration of Helsinki. Okay, so I'll go a little more on that. So the first Declaration of Helsinki took place in 1964. By the way, this Declaration of Helsinki is, from time to time, these guys which is called the World Medical Association. Now in 1964, when first time they declared this, the physicians participating in their conference were funded by pharma companies. And they said, withdraw this informed consent. And it is drawn. So if you are referring to a Declaration of Helsinki 1964 document, there is nothing like informed consent. They said, if we inform the guy, how are we going to do an experiment? Secondly, the code, Nuremberg Code had said, you cannot do experiments on patients who are admitted or, institutionalized, mental patients, jail inmates and other, those who are confined in institutions. So they said, if we do this, how are we going to do trial on vaccines in children? How are we going to do the drug testing? Okay? So they withdrew this. So whatever Nuremberg trial said, these guys in declaration, they said, withdraw this. Because they were all funded. The guys, like if you are funded by pharma companies, you'll be supporting their cause. Comes this guy, and every physician in the world must know this guy, Henry Beecher. Henry Beecher was an assistant professor in the Department of Anesthesia in the Mass